How are you, folks? Dave Brown back here with the New Populist. Thank you again for joining me. Now, if you have watched any of my previous videos on Ukraine, you would know that my biggest frustration, putting aside who's right and who's wrong here, my biggest frustration is that we prodded Ukraine into fighting a war against Russia that ultimately they cannot win. Now, early on in the conflict, we had some of our generals, some of our politicians saying that Ukraine could take back Crimea. That was never realistic. That was just all garbage. And deep down, the people saying that, I don't think actually believed it. Although some of them might have. But if you listen to the people in the Pentagon, Lloyd Austin, Mark Milley, even though they supported the conflict, their comments, if you listen carefully, they knew there was a limitation to what Ukraine could do, and they knew that at some point they would have to stop and negotiate because they simply didn't have enough battle power or combat power to expel Russia completely from the occupied territories. And if you really push some of these people, they would actually admit what our true purpose was. It wasn't for Ukraine to win, really. We were trying to hurt Russia, to damage Russia. There was that think tank paper from Rand Corporation, 2019, that talked about different ways to destabilize Russia. And one of those ways was to provide Ukraine with weapons to provoke Russia into some sort of conflict. And again, it was never about making Ukraine better or free or supporting liberty. It was about trying to hurt Vladimir Putin and cause the collapse of his government. That's what it was about. Can we kill Russians? Can we degrade their military? Can we cause them economic suffering? That was our true intention. And in order to do that, we were willing to sacrifice the country of Ukraine. And you will never get a number of killed in action from Western politicians. They will never say what it is, which is a big clue. But that number is probably close to 500,000 men, which is absolutely appalling. And that does not include the wounded in action. So that number, along with the killed in action, it's well over 1 million. And even when this conflict ends, Ukraine is going to be just damaged for decades. Their recovery will take decades. So with that in mind, I want to talk about what is going on in Taiwan. We have China. They're doing their drills, more of them, practicing how to blockade the island in the case that they would invade. And of course, the U.S. calls this a provocation, these drills. And what China calls a provocation is the fact that just a couple of days ago, the U.S., for the first time since 1994, has delivered tanks to the island of Taiwan. And Taiwan received 38 M1A2T Abrams tanks. And next year they will get another 42 and 28 in 2026 for a total of 108 M1A2T Abrams tanks. And what is something that's important here is that this deal was approved by the U.S. State Department in 2019, which is 3 years before the start of the war in Ukraine. And why is that significant? Well, Ukraine too received Abrams tanks. They received 31 Abrams tanks. And the Kiev regime argued that these tanks would be needed to go on the offensive against the Russians, and they were very important. Well, as it turned out, warfare has changed rapidly over the last 2.5 years, and those tanks that Ukraine got did not prove to be of much use. We have an article here from CNN back in May of this year. And here's what it says. Ukraine has sidelined U.S.-provided Abrams M1A1 battle tanks for now in its fight against Russia, in part because Russian drone warfare has made it too difficult for them to operate without detection or coming under attack, two U.S. military officials told the Associated Press. The U.S. agreed to send 31 Abrams to Ukraine in January 2023 after an aggressive months-long campaign by Kyiv, arguing that the tanks, which cost about $10 million apiece, were vital to its ability to breach Russian lines. Its armor, these M1A1 tanks, is not sufficient for the moment, said one crew member, call sign Joker. It doesn't protect the crew. For real, today, this is the war of drones. So now, when the tank rolls out, they always try to hit them. His colleague, Dnipro, added, they are the number one target. Without defense, the crew does not survive at the battlefield, he said. So Ukraine gets these tanks, and the Russians target them, and in fact, they were actually putting bounties on these Abrams tanks. So the Russian crews with the anti-tank weapons were hunting them. They had bad armor, according to the Ukrainians. They are susceptible to drones, and they need air and artillery support to be effective. So Ukraine gets these tanks, several get destroyed, and then Ukraine takes them off of the front lines because they are just ineffective and essentially rolling coffins for the Ukrainian crews inside of them. So with that in mind, we have Taiwan receiving these Abrams tanks. And will these tanks actually do anything to help Taiwan? Well, we have an article here from Military Watch magazine. Taiwan acquires first new tanks in 30 years. Was the American M1A2T Abrams the right choice? The ROCAF is set to receive 108 M1A2 tanks, although these notably lack the depleted uranium armor used by the U.S. Army, with FMS export armor used in its stead. This significantly reduces armor protection levels for the vehicles, with Abrams tanks lacking depleted uranium armor having proven highly vulnerable to attack using even relatively basic anti-tank weapons when deployed by the Iraqi army and the Ukrainian army. These tanks notably also lack the Israeli Trophy Active Protection System, which is being integrated onto modern variants of the Abrams tank, both for domestic use and for export, meaning they cannot intercept incoming projectiles as advanced tanks from the Chinese mainland are able to. Indeed, the ROCAF's selection of the Abrams was largely considered to have been made due to a lack of other options, since Taipei's international statutes mean no parties other than the United States are willing to openly supply it with advanced armaments. Built with a fuel-hungry gas turbine engine, the tank class was considered optimal for offensives through Central Europe, but is likely not optimal for the ROCAF's asymmetric defense strategy. Wow, so Taiwan is getting these tanks that don't have the depleted uranium armor that the U.S. tanks have. They don't have this system that can intercept projectiles, and they're propulsion system really doesn't match what Taiwan asymmetric strategy would need them to do. So we're giving these tanks to Taiwan, the United States, and it appears it won't really be that meaningful as far as defense. Now, what does the United States get? Well, this deal made our defense contractors $10 billion. And we can have our leaders say, hey, look, we're giving Taiwan all these weapons to fight the Chinese. And as pointed out, these tanks may not actually do a whole lot. So the question that, again, Taiwan has to ask itself is, what is realistic in the future? We're seeing Ukraine lose against Russia and their country being destroyed. And now, with the focus moving away from Ukraine over to the Pacific, now you guys are in the barrel. Do you work something out with the Chinese, or do you fight the Chinese if it comes to that? And I can't answer that question. Only people in Taiwan can. But I would caution them, and as an American who has seen my government use other countries as proxies to fight our battles, I would caution you with believing that the United States will be there for you, believing that we have your back. And I would resist the prodding of the United States. Whatever you do, do it because you want to do it, not because you believe the promises of the United States. When push comes to shove, just like Ukraine, at some point, we're going to back out. Because ultimately, we do not want to get into a direct confrontation with another nuclear superpower. The United States will not sacrifice itself for a small island in the Pacific. We will not. We say we will, defend Taiwan. We'll make a big deal out of it, liberty and freedom. But our ultimate goal with giving weapons to Taiwan is, just like Ukraine, not to beat China, but to hurt China and make it so that if they do invade, it comes at a big cost, even if it ultimately means Taiwan is sacrificed. So I don't want to see Taiwan be the next sacrificial lamb for U.S. foreign policy. And if this latest deal with these tanks are any indication, we are not really giving you anything that's going to be a game changer. It looks good. Our politicians will celebrate it as being steps to fight the Chinese. But ultimately, just like Ukraine, it will not be enough. So that is something for the people of Taiwan to think about. Well, that is it for now. If you are new to my channel, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.